It's Weighing In, NJ.com's high school wrestling podcast.
What's going on, everyone? Ryan Patty from NJ.com here. I'm joined by my three fellow New Jersey high school wrestling experts, and Bill Evans, Joe Zadalis, and Jacob Ferriet. And you're listening to episode number 8 of Weighing In, your go-to New Jersey high school wrestling podcast. This episode is going to be just, I don't even know the word to describe it, because I just can't believe that we're going to be talking about what has happened these last 72 hours. And I've been covering this sport for over 6 years now, and these are the craziest of times. And it's hard to wrap my head around where we're at right now. And I know you guys are just as dumbfounded as I am. So we're going to start by talking about what has us all so speechless, the aftermath of it, both on and off the mat. And also, we're obviously going to find the time to recap the good from District Saturday. And we'll also take a quick look at what's coming for regions this week. Now, most of you listeners know what I'm referring to, but if you live under a rock, 3-time state champ Anthony Knox has been disqualified for the rest of the postseason for his involvement in the brawl that happened at District 25 in Collingswood on Saturday. Words were exchanged, the rumor is, and the brawl became violent when Knox's father, also Anthony, went up into the crowd and made it physical. And both Knox and his dad left Collingswood in handcuffs. I want to start by saying that the four of us have all had the chance to interview and cover Anthony these past 4 years, and we've had positive experiences with him and his dad, who has helped facilitate some of these interviews. And Anthony has very much been very good to us and a treat to cover. But if you're listening to this podcast, if you're following the situation, that to me would mean you're a wrestling fan. And the best wrestler in the state is not going to be in Atlantic City next week. You know, think about that. Is that a good thing? Is that good for the sport? To me, absolutely not. But neither is a fight in the stands. And we don't know the full details, but the video evidence and the rumors that are circling out there is certainly telling as to how ugly this got. And, you know, Anthony had 2 weeks left of high school wrestling. And with all due respect to everyone else at 126 pounds, because we all, you know, enjoy covering you guys, no one was beating Anthony Knox this year. And he would have been the 5th wrestler in state history to be a 4-time state champ. And he's one of the most talented wrestlers in state history. And this was the only way he was going to lose. So the fact that the Knoxes lost their cool here is beyond devastating. It's one of the most unfortunate high school sports scenes we've ever seen. But I'll end with this, and I'll pass it over to Joe once I make this statement, because he's always, you know, good at saying the right things in these kind of situations. And like I said, we don't know the details, but we hear the rumors as to what was happening before the brawl. And I'm going to say this: at what point are grown men, grown women going to stop disrespecting high school kids for the singlet that they wear? Because this is not a one-time occurrence. This happened at other district locations this year, and it happened at regions last year, and Joe was there to see it. But overall, it's a sickening situation. I'm genuinely sad as a wrestling fan at what went down in Collingswood, and I know you guys are too. And there's no winners here. And the high school wrestling career of Anthony Knox now has the most disappointing ending that you could ever draw up. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, I've been doing this for 47 years, and I've never seen anything like this. It has surely rocked the New Jersey wrestling world. And sadly, as you stated, Ryan, there are going to be people happy that he is not there. I don't think there's any one of the four of us who were not looking forward to seeing something historic. I've seen the other 4 wrestlers win their championships, and it is a special 6 minutes at Boardwalk Hall, and the wrestling fans acknowledge and realize what an accomplishment that is. And, you know, Anthony Knox is arguably the best wrestler in state history. His technique, his ability, his mindset is phenomenal. When he won his title last year, I met him, talked to him. He was gracious, he was humble, and he was very great to talk to. the things that happened there, yes, Region 6 last year, some fans from one school, when the big team in the region lost a couple of matches, started talking some smack, and one of the wrestlers from that team went up into the stands. There were no blows thrown because Jackson police reacted to it quickly. I'm having a hard time understanding what made Anthony Knox Sr. go across the gym and into the stands if it wasn't about his son. And even if it was, be thick-skinned. I don't know what the folks from the other schools were saying. I have been told that I don't believe it was anything derogatory, but they were overly vociferous whenever somebody from Vianney lost. And I don't know if there's anything wrong with that. Is it annoying? Yes. But, I think we're all looking forward to seeing this kid win his fifth, to talking to him about it. It's a moment to be treasured and cherished. I spoke to 3 of the 4 other champions earlier this year, and all of them said that it's one of the proudest moments of their lives, that they really didn't understand what they accomplished. And here's this kid who obviously has put the effort in to get this good, and now it's gone just because of a split-second decision to go into the stands. Now, the NJSIAA is going to be vilified for suspending the kid. Well, all he did was got into a fight. There are fights in school every day. The NJSIAA rules are clear on this. You leave the bench area and go to the stands, you're done. We've seen video of him leaving the bench and, sprinting up the bleachers to be involved in the melee. I don't see any way around it. I don't see, how that's going to be defended. And I think in this case, Colleen McGuire was backed into a corner. She didn't want to be the one to end this kid's career, but this is more or less a message that needs to be sent, that kind of unsportsmanlike behavior is not going to be tolerated. So again, I don't feel sorry for him. I'm sorry that wrestling fans like us and the others around New Jersey don't get the opportunity to see history. And with that, I will pass it on to Jake. I know you had some thoughts, Jake, because you've spent a little time with Anthony Knox and his family.
Yeah, I've been around the Knoxes fairly intimately for about the last month, both at their training club in Marlboro at Rhino Wrestling Club, as well as their house. And yeah, my thoughts are definitely along the lines of kind of everybody's here. Insofar as, I am sorry that this is how Anthony's career comes to an end. It seems unbecoming and unfitting that, he is kind of a 4-time state champ in assumption only, if we want to call it, not, an actual 4-time state champ. But, the thing that crossed my mind is, and, Joe, Bill, you guys having covered the sport for a lot longer, in my mind, I think the question that is front and center is, what impact, if any, does this have on his legacy? And does this take away from anything that he accomplished, in a St. John Vianney singlet, or in a singlet at, Who's Number One or Super 32 or Fargo? And, is he viewed as a 3-time state champ in the likes of, a lot of the other 3-time state champs? Is he viewed in the likes of the Sorianos and the Ashnolts and the Campolitanos, who are the 4-timers? And, having gotten to talk to Anthony, one thing that he said is his legacy is important to him. And so I'll be curious to see, when the dust settles on all this, what the sort of prevailing consensus is on what his legacy is. And, to your point, Joe, I think you're absolutely right that the NJSIAA made the right call here. As painful as it might be that this kid's not going to be there, as much as, it might take some luster out of the tournament potentially, or draw less eyeballs, the NJSIAA has these rules. Vianney's a member school. That comes with abiding by these rules. And if Colleen or the state association were to say, because you're so good, you get preferential treatment, well, then why have any rules at all? And, I think that was a prevailing sentiment in the coaches that I was talking to. They all agreed. And, I think that it makes sense. I mean, if you're going to have these rules, you have to enforce them across the board. And, nobody wants to be the one to end this kid's career this way. So I'm sure, maybe it was an easy decision, maybe it wasn't, but I'm sure one that wasn't made lightly. And, I don't know that there will be any solace taken in that, but I think that is important to say. And, the other thing too is, yes, obviously this happened and, nobody should be condoning what happened. But I think it's also important to understand that, to Ryan's point about there's a perception. Well, is perception reality? Is this family one that's misunderstood? Is this family one that should be defined by, this singular moment? I don't know that I have good answers to that. I don't know that any of the four of us have good answers to that. But I think that this is not a black and white situation to the extent that maybe everybody thinks it is, or that there aren't multiple layers to this. But yeah, to Joe's point, I think the saddest part of all this is that, fans and us as reporters, we're not going to get to see a chance at state history. And I mean, I off the top of my head, there were what, a couple of freshman state champs last year, and obviously it's early to predict that any of them might be a four-timer, but there's a reason it's been 10 years or close to 10 years since Nick Soriano last won his fourth title. It's not an easy thing to do, and especially here in New Jersey where we only wrestle to one state champ. So I think that aspect of not knowing what's next and not knowing when we might see the next, whether it's Anthony Knox, whether it's the next Nick Soriano, whether it's the next four-time state champ who carves their own lane, I think that that's part of this too.
Now, before we dive into the aftermath, and it's going to be a big aftermath, Bill, you had the chance to talk to Anthony a bunch over the course of his career, a lot of it at national tournaments. Your reaction to this, and kind of just, are you as speechless as we are?
It's devastating, really. I mean, obviously for the family, for Anthony, but I think for wrestling fans in general, I mean, this should have ended with him wrestling the last match on that final Saturday in Atlantic City and getting a standing ovation for the career that he had. I mean, it's, I wrote a story that ran last week where I talked to a lot of different people, coaches, Mike Gray included, who was, one of the four-timers, the four-timers, about whether he was actually the best ever. And there's a lot of opinions on that, but he was in that conversation. It is hard to not put him in the top 5, probably even the top 3. And for a lot of people, he was the best. I mean, nobody, with the exception, I think, of Damian Hahn, scored points like Anthony Knox. And this is tough. I mean, like Jake said, this is going to be a black mark. I mean, when we talk about his career 10, 20 years from now, it's going to be a big part of it that he didn't get a chance to finish what he started. I was the first one out of us to actually talk to him, but when he was back in the 8th grade, he was at a showcase event during COVID, and he had just come off wrestling in a it was David Taylor was wrestling Jordan Burroughs on a flow card, and he was on the undercard, and he wrestled on it and won his match. And then about a week later, he wrestled Luke Stanich, who ended up becoming a Roxbury state champ and Lehigh All-American, and Alex Ninny, who ended up becoming a state finalist for CBA and is now at Rutgers. And, at that time, he said his goal was basically to be the next Nick Soriano. He was going to be an undefeated 4-time state champion. And he said that in the 8th grade. And at the time, it seemed logical. He lost one match in his career as a freshman in the finals of Escape the Rock in overtime. One thing I'll say, talking again, I've talked to him a lot as we all have. Certainly he could be cocky at times, but he was very appreciative of the people who came before him, of history. And one thing that impressed me that day was he lost, and I went up to talk to him, and he was more than willing to give an interview. And a lot of kids in that situation who see their dreams, disappear, in terms of at least being a 4-time undefeated state champ, probably wouldn't have been willing to do that. And so I appreciated that he did that, and he didn't lose again. And he was on his way, obviously, to being a 4-timer. A very exclusive club, as we've said. I mean, there's been a lot of 3-timers, not a lot, less than 40, but a number that won as freshmen, that won as sophomores, and at some point in the their 4-year career stumbled, and he did not, and he was not, as Ryan said, not going to this year, unless something crazy happened, and something crazy happened. I'm sure if his dad and him could go back and have those 5 minutes back, that they would. Again, it's hard to argue with the decision, considering what we've heard about what happened, and what has come out of it. But it's devastating, because he is one of the best ever, and I think as we talk about him in the future, we can still consider him one of the best ever. But there's always going to be something missing, because this should have ended much differently 2 weeks from now.
Great points, guys, and great points, Bill. Yeah, I'm completely with you. And, even with this, in terms of talent, he's on my Mount Rushmore in terms of New Jersey high school wrestlers. So, like I said, there's an aftermath here. I mean, there's going to be, things that get discussed beyond what happened. And, I think one that a lot of people are already starting to turn the wheels on is the state of District Saturday. Is it broken? Can we prevent situations like this? And even to a degree with regions, can we prevent situations like this? And to me, I don't think it's broken. I think it starts with better fan behavior. And I understand the geographical aspect to it, and I want to let Bill speak on that in a second, because he's a proponent of it, and I see his points. But coaches and parents, on the geographical front, coaches and parents don't like the long bus rides. They don't like staying in a hotel, and people get upset. On a different note, that a non-public is coming into their district and winning a bunch of titles. But to me, that is secondary, because it should be all about getting the best kids to Atlantic City and creating a way where that's going to happen. And I feel like the NJSIAA has been pretty good at that. And I've had coaches tell me that they would go to great lengths to keep that intact, for the better of the sport, to keep things as balanced as they are, despite the length that, teams have to travel during districts and regions. The NJSIAA makes sure things are fair, with this kind of stuff. They rotate the non-pubs and they do things like that. It's very fair and balanced. And I feel like these past couple years, the best kids are in Atlantic City. There's even some good region thirds and region fourths. And districts, for the most part, are always going to be local tournaments. So, to me, the stray non-publics, it's kind of, you just got to deal with it. If you start bunching these big public schools and non-publics together, you're jeopardizing getting the best kids to Boardwalk Hall. And this tournament now is an individual tournament. We've reached the individual part. We're not wrestling duels. This is all individual. And in order to be the best, you have to beat the best. So to me, the answer is not separating these schools. It's not Region 9. The answer to me is stopping the nonsense in the stands and being grown-ups about every situation. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with that point. I mean, look, there's no reason to have a brawl. There's no reason for some of the comments that are made. Are there fans of kids and from their own districts or from their own areas that are going to have some resentment toward a team that is dominating the tournament? Especially when that team comes from as far away, and in this instance that St. John Vianney did. Collingswood was pretty much a local tournament. Audubon, Haddon Township, Paul VI, all those schools were 10 minutes away from each other. And then Vianney comes in and they're from 80 miles away, and they win the first 9 bouts. And I know people were getting a little restless about that, and I'm sure. Could that change? I mean, I think it could. I mean, I look at, Delsea is its own district, has been a host for a long time, dominates to that level. There isn't that level of resentment. I haven't seen. I've covered that district a couple times. of course, they're the home district, and the teams that are in that district are from that area. And Delsey just happens to be a lot better than them. But, they move St. John Vianney in from 80 miles away, and Camden Catholic went all the way down to Absegami. If Camden Catholic, who is probably almost as good as St. John Vianney, was there, would there be so much resentment? Camden Catholic's only in Cherry Hill. They have all, South Jersey kids. Obviously there's a perception of non-publics, and people don't like that the kids from certain towns are going to a non-public when they could be wrestling for their hometown team. But I think at least if they're South, if they're teams from that area, then maybe it's not viewed, or it's viewed in a different light. St. Augustine was all the way down to Paulsboro. St. Augustine's at Absegami, and Camden Catholic's at Collingswood. Now, obviously, what do you do about St. John Vianney? They're trying to separate these kids, and especially at the region level, right? So now you have if you put all those powerhouse schools, if you have Southern and St. John Vianney and Christian Brothers, all in the same region, then maybe that in some ways that's not fair. Now, obviously, geographically, that's maybe the right thing to do, but maybe that's not fair to some of the other schools in that region. I mean, I go back, a long time when District 29 was dominant, and because there was Paulsboro and Clearview and Kingsway and Gateway, Pittman, all these were strong programs. I remember a year, a kid from Woodbury, Mike Seckman, finished third in his weight class in a 9-8 decision and ended up in the state finals because District 29 was loaded every year. And some of the other districts nearby were not. And, there was always talk like, maybe we should break this up a little bit because there's kids that are losing on opening night at District 29 that could be winning the district like right down the road. So I think, there's got to be a balance somehow between the geography and the competitiveness. I think about 10 years ago, they blew up the geography and everybody hated it. I mean, they just hated it. Pinelands was at Delsey and Southern was at Kingsway, and nobody, you were bringing in 3 or 4 schools from, 100 miles away, and nobody liked that. So we've kind of gotten back to the neighborhood districts, but they're still, because of the non-publics, they're still separating the non-publics and making sure that they're, there's a few of them in each region so that one doesn't get, overly powerful. And there's probably no easy answer. But, I'm sure it'll take another look at it after this year and see, and, see what they're going to do about it. Maybe they don't change it, but, I think there's definitely, some animosity for those teams that come from out the area. And like you said, the best thing is that, fans should not react the way they do. But I'm sure it's going to get looked at.
Joe, what's your outlook for District Saturday?
Well, I ran the Region 6 tournament for 2 or 3 years when it was at Townsville North. And there was a year where a 6th place finisher in Region 6, 6th place, beat 2 kids on the podium. And he didn't even get to go to the States. Back in that era, Region 6 had 40-some schools in its region, and there were others further north that had 31. So here you have kids breaking their necks to try and get through to the state tournament in Region 6, and up in the north, there were kids getting buys into the semifinals. So the NJSIAA addressed that. This is not something you're going to fix overnight. And as one Region 6 coach said to me today, those non-public teams have to go somewhere. So wherever the NJSIAA puts them, that particular group of opponents is going to be unhappy. But they have to go somewhere. And they're only going to be in that district for a single season, and they're going to get rotated somewhere else. So, I think the state is trying to look at districts where the non-public's presence isn't as damaging. And what I mean by that is, if you have a district where you have middle of the road teams, a majority of them, they weren't going to get more than one or two kids through anyway. So if you drop St. Peter's or Christian Brothers or Vianney in there, yes, they're going to run roughshod and, send or Del Barton last year, and this year I think they sent all 14 kids. but they got to go somewhere. And was it fair when Don Bosco and St. Joe's and Bergen Catholic were all in the same region? Well, not only wasn't it fair to them, it wasn't fair to the other schools in there. So I don't think it's broken, Ryan. I think it's something that we have to live with. And let's face it, there is never going, the Department of Education has ruled twice already that you can't segregate, you can't put all the non-public schools in the one district or one region. So that's never going to happen. And I just, last year I cover Region 6. I'm a short conference guy. St. Peter's Prep came in. They had 13 kids in the tournament. None of the short conference people were happy about that because that was going to keep one of their kids out. But I don't see a way around it. I think we have all seen, I know I have, that tempers and comments and, they get rude and obnoxious. And, I know getting to the state tournament is, a lifelong goal for some people, but Jesus, it's only a wrestling match. Like, I can we just kind of let the kids wrestle and whatever happens. I mean, I think it's out of control. I mean, do we really need, the New Jersey legislature to pass laws protecting referees and coaches? Something wrong with that. So, Ron, I don't think it's broke. I think it needs to be tinkered with. But if somebody out there has an answer that's going to make the entire state happy, send it to me and I'll be glad to write about it. But there is no perfect answer.
Well said, Joe. And you're right. It's just wrestling. And like, these are human beings. You know what I mean? Like, we're booing and ridiculing human beings, high school kids, for the singlet that they're wearing. These kids are taking heat for it. There's really not a whole lot to say on that front. Jake, your reaction to kind of just the outlook of District Saturday.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm a lifelong public school guy. I grew up in Bergen County, as did you, Ryan, where non-publics reign supreme here. I mean, this year last year at the Bergen County tournament, it was basically a Bergen, Joe's, Bosco tri-meet, might as well have been. And, coaches have accepted that's just kind of what it's going to be. And I think, obviously Vianney has become its own thing with the emergence of Anthony Knox, but also guys like Jake Saltzman, Pat O'Keefe, a lot of their hammers in that lineup. But by and large, the concentration of the dominant non-public schools for, a lot of wrestling's history has been in the northern part of New Jersey, in Bergen County, with Bosco, with Bergen, obviously Peters, St. Joe's. And so I think, that's something interesting here too, because like Joe said, these schools have to go somewhere. And, nobody is going to be happy necessarily to have one of those schools in their district. But the thing, I was talking to a non-public coach today, and, the thing that he said to me that I thought was really interesting was, yes, these public schools might not be happy to have a non-public in their district, but if it's a non-public in their area, okay, at least if it's, a school and you're pulling kids from all Middlesex County and you're in a district with other Middlesex County schools, yeah, there might be some resentment because those kids are in at Sayreville or are in at Woodbridge or are in at Monroe. But if they're all from the same area, even the kids at a non-public school likely grew up wrestling club or grew up in the same area as a lot of these kids at the public schools. So that familiarity on the family level and, that rapport and that those relationships are sort of already baked in. And so I think you see less animosity there for that reason. It's, it's the same thing. I'm sure, people weren't thrilled with, Bosco being in District 2, but those being largely Bergen County schools, again, a lot of those kids from Bosco are from Bergen County. A lot of them have, relationships with other kids at these public schools in Bergen County. I think that coaches and teams and parents will get over it. And I understand that might be critical for me to say, having never wrestled, not fully understanding what it means. But at the end of the day, who am I, who are any of us to judge these kids for going to one of these schools? I'm not going to tell, some parent how to spend their money and that they can't send their kid to Bergen Catholic, or that they can't send their kid to St. Joe's or Pope John or wherever it might be, just because you want them at the public school. These kids are allowed to make this decision, and they shouldn't be faulted for that. And to boo them just because you don't like the decision a 14-year-old kid made, to me, that's where, kind of the line needs to be drawn. And it goes back to, the point that you made about fan behavior. And, in my mind, obviously, again, not all non-public schools are created equal as well. I mean, there are some schools that are non-public that maybe have one or two good wrestlers. And so do they deserve to be lumped into the same category as, a St. Peter's or a St. John Vianney or, St. Augustine, whomever it might be? And, I think that's an important calculus to weigh in this too. I mean, we mentioned Delsey is a public school, Rumson is a public school. A lot of these public schools operate under, interesting guidelines as well. And, I was at District 4, which was at West Essex, and that was a lot of public school. It was entirely public schools, but it was, small group 1 schools. It was, High Point, which has been a perennial public power for the last 2.5 decades. And you know what? Yeah, High Point sent 11 through to regions, but New Milford had, which is an NJIC school, sent, 3 or 4 to regions, had 3 champs. Pompton Lakes, which is an NJIC school, had 3 champs. So there is an avenue there, and it can't just be as simple as, not having a district, a non-public school in your district. There are good wrestlers everywhere. And at some point, might the good wrestlers run into a kid from a non-public school? Absolutely. But shouldn't we want those kids to be getting better and seeing the best competition? Isn't that what everybody waxes poetic about this sport and makes it so great? So, again, yes, I think obviously the fan behavior, certainly abhorrent, there's no place for it. But again, these are high school kids that made a decision, and you're really going to let it bother you that much? To me, it just seems misplaced. So, in my mind, I think District Saturday is great. And, for me personally, the district I was at, I mean, it means something to a lot of these schools. Whether it should or it shouldn't isn't for me to say. But, for a school like New Milford to have a 4-time district champ, that's a tiny Group 1 school in an area with a lot bigger schools, with schools that may get more publicity, and it means something for them. And I think for those schools to lose that would be a shame. And, does that mean that, those schools should never see a non-public? I don't know. There's no good answer. There's no good or easy solution that's going to make everyone happy, like Joe said. So, we may eventually just have to, take a spoonful of sugar with our medicine and, kind of accept it.
Guys, great points. Those are some of the ramifications that we're going to start to hear about off the mat. Now, on the mat, 126 is all of a sudden pretty darn open. And the name that, in my opinion, everyone should be keeping an eye on right now is Bergen Catholic Jr. Nate Braun. He was number 2 in our individual rankings past 2 weeks. And now you could pretty much consider him number 1 if you take Knox out of the picture. Braun was a state finalist at 106 pounds as a freshman, and he was a 3rd placer last year at 113 after having not wrestled pretty much the entire season up until the postseason. He was also banged up for a decent amount of this year as a 132 pounder, and we've talked about that weight class. It's a very good weight class. He went down to 126 and out of that loaded weight class, and right now, as far as I'm concerned, he looks like the name to beat. And, there's a few other guys from my area. Mikey Batista from St. Joe's. He's had a very good season. Devin Ryan from New Milford. He's got the chance to get another state medal. Batista is a 1-time state medalist. Devin Ryan is a 2-timer. But right now, Braun's my pick here. When he's healthy, he's outstanding. Bill, I know at this weight down your way, Haggerty, Summers, Pack, Joyce, there's so many names that I figure we have to be keeping, our eyes on, right?
And that's basically the Region 8 bracket. I mean, all those guys are in the same region, so it's going to be phenomenal, and kind of good luck to everybody else trying to get out. And Colton Haggerty's at the top of the list. He was 7th in the state last year. He was a region champ. He's we had him, I guess, ranked 2 before Braun came down. Yeah, he made the Escape the Rock quarters this year, and then before he lost to Knox. So I put him at the top. He's definitely a guy that could win it now. But the rest of that group is really good. I mean, Carter Pack has been phenomenal for a couple months. He has an 8-0 win over Gage Summers. This past week, he wrestled Hayden Holmes from Paulsboro, who was probably, maybe a little small for 126 because he'd been wrestling 113 all year. But he was a 3-time district champ. He was going for his 4th district title, and Pack teched him. He's been really, really good. And I look forward to, I think that's a potential final. But you do have to, Summers will get another shot at Pack. They're on the same side of the bracket. He's a quality wrestler that's been in the States, and so has Joyce. So, I mean, those are the top 4 guys. And I really think any of them or all of them could end up on the podium in Atlantic City, depending on how things break down. But, they're certainly in the mix for, if not a state title, then a state medal.
Jake, who are you keeping your eye on at 126 now?
Yeah. So I guess first things first, Ryan, I apologize for stealing your NJIC thunder, but I mean, Devin Ryan to me is, a great story. Here's a kid who's, was recruited by every non-public school in the book, chose to stay home at New Milford, has parlayed that into a scholarship to go wrestle at West Point next year, and 2-time state medalist for a program like that. He has revitalized that program. I mean, there was a time when they were co-oping with Woodridge and there were 6 kids in the program and the program might have folded. And so I think, whatever Devin Ryan does in Atlantic City, the impact that he has on that program is going to be, felt certainly for a long, long time. And I think he's got a great shot. I mean, Nate Braun, obviously, like you said, 2 guys that I'm keeping an eye on are both in Region 4, actually. Anthony DeAndrea from Watchung Hills, who himself is a 2-time state medalist. He's a junior. And Jaden Perez, who's a senior from Del Val. They've both wrestled this year. First time, DeAndrea beat Perez 3-2 for his 100th win. They met in the district final. DeAndrea widened the gap, beat Perez 8-4. But, the thing that both DeAndrea and Watchung Hills coach Jim Huff have told me throughout the year is it's hard to wrestle the same opponent multiple times because you get to pick up on each other's tendencies. You get to know what the other guy is going to do. And so you expect the gap to close over time, not widen. So, they're the top 2 seeds at Region 4 and 126. If they meet in the region final, I'll be fascinated to see how that one goes. But even beyond those 2, you will get into some of the regions a little bit later. But, that's a bracket that I'm looking at beyond just those 2. But I think in the kind of northwest central part of the state, DeAndrea and Perez, I think definitely there's a path there for them.
Joe, who's the wrestler or wrestlers you're keeping an eye on at 126 now?
Well, with Knox out, I think the best opportunity belongs to Kevin Rulin from Red Bank Regional. I would assume he is going to get the top seed at 120. He will be in Region 6, but he was on the podium last year. I'm sure he thinks he can get back to the podium this year, but let's face it, the bracket's totally different now. As you mentioned, it's completely wide open, and hopefully those kids let it all hang out on next week.
All right, now let's turn the page here. Let's dive into what we saw, the good from district Saturday. My big story, once again, is Adrian DeJesus. He wrestled at District 5 and coasted to a title, which, is kind of to be expected. But, when you think back to just over a week ago and remember the pain he was in after that non-public A final, it's incredible that he was able to pull this off. And we took him out of our pound-for-pound rankings thinking that he wasn't going to wrestle, and we hesitated and considered dropping him out of our individual rankings after the non-public A final. But, here we are. He's wrestling, in a pretty favorable weight at Region 2. There's a couple state qualifiers there. Noah Zindaki from Wayne Valley's had a great season. But, Adrian DeJesus is far and above everyone in that bracket. And the bottom line to me right now is, what he's doing is so inspirational. He's gaining momentum that he very much needs, and the mat time he very much needs to get to Atlantic City and do what he's capable of doing when he's healthy. He's a 2-time state champion, and I think that with just a little more self-belief and maybe trusting, his body a little bit, he can be the Adrian DeJesus that we know and love to watch. And also on District Saturday, you had Del Barton. Joe mentioned that 14 kids got through. Not only did 14 kids get through, 14 kids won. And as far as I know, that's the only time that's ever been done. And this is the part of the season where they care the most. They care about, how many kids they can get to Atlantic City and how many kids can take the top of the podium in Atlantic City. And a feat like this just shows how good they are from 106 to 285. And, they might not have won non-public A, but head coach Brian Stoll and his staff have a chance to get a ridiculous amount of kids to the podium this year. I think they could set, a record there. I'm not sure what that record is off the top of my head, but I think that there's going to be a lot of green wave on the podium in Atlantic City, and it's going to be exciting to see what they do the rest of the way. Jake, what'd you see from districts that kind of caught your attention?
Yeah, so like I said, I was at District 4 at West Essex, entirely filled with public schools, and High Point, first time in the new district. They had a great tournament. Billy Smith told me, this time of year, to kind of steal a line from Jim Valdano, is just about survive and advance. That's kind of all you got to do. You don't have to place first. You just have to get to the next tournament. And they did that. I mean, they had 2 champs in Logan Tackett, a freshman at 106, and Nick Clayton, who repeated at 150. But a lot of their qualifiers came from runner-up finishes. I mean, they had 8 guys in the finals, so they went 2 for 6, but still they get to regions all the same. And then they had, a couple of third-place finishers as well. So, they did well, but, they weren't overly dominant. I mean, I think they won the team race by less than 20 points over West Essex. So, there was a lot of great wrestling to go around. And, I made reference to it a little bit earlier. But if you look at the NJIC in that district, Butler had a district champ. Pompton Lakes had 3 district champs. New Milford had a few district champs. So, it just goes to show that there's good wrestling all over the place. And that, you don't have to be at one of these big-time powerhouses to have this success. And, the hosts, West Essex, they had their fair share of champs too. Ben Marcus, Reed Clausey, they qualified a bunch as well for regions. So, I think for me, the thing that stood out was it was kind of a banner day up north for public schools, for small public schools. And, I think come Region 1 this weekend, I think it'll be interesting to see with a larger sample size against kids from, a larger area, how those kids fare. Can they build on, that experience and that success, especially some of the younger guys or some of the guys who've never been to regions before. You look at a team that was in District 4 like Northern Highlands. Northern Highlands had 2 region qualifiers last year and 3 guys who finished 4th in the district and just missed out. All 3 of those guys improved their standing this year. And the Highlanders and Coach Dan Rehane are sending 5 to regions, including a champ in Mike Echeverry, who took 4th last year. And so I think it's, again, it's survive in advance. It's just qualifying for the next tournament. It's maybe outplacing your seed or your place a little bit, here and there, little by little, and good things can happen. And so, I'll be curious to see to what extent that takes place at Region 1 this year.
Joe, what are your takeaways from the good from District Saturday?
Well, for me, I covered District 23 at Wall. And the interesting thing there was the team standings. Howell won the team title by half a point. And, there were so many districts decided by 139, 150, 180 points. This one really went down to the last bout wrestled. And it was an interesting matchup because, you have Wall, a very young team, but very talented. They ran off a bunch of victories in the lower weights. So Howell at one point is down by 18 points. But then their upper weight guys, Goings, O'Rourke, and Hodgins not only win but get bonus, and they win by half a point. It was Hal's fourth straight district title, but in their third different district. And it was just it was a spirited event because the word started to get out how close the team points were, and it ended up being a nice day for John Gagliano. After it started as bad as it could get, his senior Xavier Ortega, a three-time region champion, did not make weight. It was a big loss at the scales, and Hal did not see that coming. But they regrouped and survived. They got an upset win and wound up winning the team title. And I thought that was, something spirited and good for the sport, Ryan.
Bill, take us home here. What'd you get from districts that caught your attention? Good stuff.
Yeah, I was at where was that? District 27 at Cinnaminson. Yeah, I think you forget what the numbers are because they move around every year. But yeah, that was some good stuff there. First of all, usually one of the highlights or notable things, at least I would say, is not the handing out of the Assistant Coach of the Year award, but that went to Colin Monahan from Red Bank Catholic, who passed away in October at the age of 28 of cancer. And it's been a driving force for that program for this entire season. He even though he was only there for a year, was a Freehold Borough grad who had come back and coached at his alma mater for a while, but then had gone to Red Bank Catholic, was much beloved. And they've been motivated to do good things this season for him. And so he was honored with that award. Red Bank Catholic won the team title, had 5 champions, including Michael DiBiase, who was a 4-timer. So it was a big day for them, and a fitting tribute to a coach that was loved there, even though he'd only been there a short time. Otherwise there were 2 5 seeds that won, which you don't usually see. Jameer Greaves from Kingsway at 190. Trevor Butler from Gloucester at heavyweight. Both of those guys were obviously extremely excited to win, not even being seeded to win a round. That's some of the beauty of a district tournament sometimes when you get those kind of upsets. And then Jackson Weller from Delran at 150 pounds won by technical fall over Tommy DiPietro, who was a region champion last year. And just he has beaten a number of really talented wrestlers this year. I don't know that I would say he's going to beat Jaden Joyce. I'm not sure anybody will from Del Barton, but certainly anybody else in that bracket, he has a chance to beat. He has been really turning it on, and that was an impressive performance. And I guess a couple of things elsewhere. The Paulsboro District at 32, Will Cruz has had a really breakout season at 106, beat state-ranked Chase Sedano from St. Augustine. John Chirico from St. Augustine was a number 5 seed that won a tournament and tech falled his way to a championship there. And then down at Apsagami, I thought it was a big upset. Middle Township's Maurice Matthews, a very good heavyweight, but he beat an undefeated Clifford Dirks from Ocean City, who had pinned him earlier in the year. I thought that was a very notable result. So some noteworthy things, and some very interesting storylines, especially out of District 27.
A lot that's happened everywhere, and a lot that's still to come, because here we are. We're on to regions. I'm going to be at Region 1 at West Milford, and it's going to be an epic one, as it always is. I've been there 6 years running now, and this could be the best installment that I've seen. Instead of St. Joe's being there like they've been in recent years, it's now, and they've always been paired up with Don Bosco for the most part, it's now Don Bosco, Bergen Catholic, Phillipsburg, and West Essex. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. I mean, you have other good programs, Kittatinny, New Milford, like Jake mentioned, Oltapan, Pascack Valley, Pompton Lakes, you name it. This region is awesome. And there's really, really good wrestlers who are going to be left on the outside looking in. I mean, that's just the way it goes this time of year. And this region is absolutely ridiculous with some of the teams that are in. You throw in Phillipsburg and West Essex into a region that's traditionally always had 2 non-publics. this region's going to be nuts. And I'm also going to be keeping my eye on Region 2 at Mount Olive. You have St. Joe's and host Mount Olive leading the way. I think it could turn into a bit of a duel there between those two schools, but there's some really good individuals at this tournament. I mentioned Noah Zindaki. He's one of them I'm keeping my eye on. And, there's a lot of kids who are going to be difference makers at a lot of different weights. I mean, I mentioned St. Joe's and Mount Olive, but I think the races to a lot of Region 3s, third placers, is going to be fascinating. Like those matchups, blood round, stuff like that. That's what you're going to want to keep an eye on here, because that's where it's probably the most fascinating at Region 2. Jake, what are you keeping your eye on at Regions 3 and 4?
Yeah, so Region 3 has Del Barton in it, so anytime that's the case, you expect the Green Wave to come out, do well, certainly qualify most of the team either by champ or by get guys in the final, and I think that there's no reason to expect anything different here. I will say though, two kids in Region 3 that I'm keeping an eye on that, Ryan, I know you've covered a lot the last few years are Carson Walsh and Donnie Almeida, both from Pope John. I think those are probably Pope John's two best chances at getting region champs, and especially for Almeida, coming over from St. Joe's, I think to show that he can, have the same level of success at Pope John, I think will be interesting. There are only a handful of weights where Del Barton doesn't have the top seed. That's 126, 138, 144, 175, 190. So, a lot of those middle and upper weights, I think the 190-pound final there between Vincenzo Laval and CJ Betts could be one of the best of the entire weekend. Certainly. So could 175. Jordan Chapman from Cranford against Timu Menbeleg from St. Benedict's. Menbeleg was a state medalist last year. Chapman was a state finalist. I think that'll be interesting. But the region I'll be at is Region 4 at Union. And, in my mind, yes, there's, there are good teams there, but there's not a prevailing, superpower. Yes, Paramus Catholic is in that region, but, and the Paladins have a lot of quality wrestlers. I don't know if they're as vaunted as Paramus Catholic teams of the past. So it'll be interesting to see. And then when you add in a team like North Hunterdon that just won the Group 4 title, that is white hot and wrestling really well. The Lions last year sent 5 wrestlers to Atlantic City. That was the most of any public school in Region 4. 3 of those qualifiers are back. There's no reason to think they can't send that many or more this year. Then when you look at Watchung Hills, which qualified 10, you look at Westfield, I think, which qualified double digits. There are a lot of, schools that we wouldn't necessarily think of that are going to be well represented here. And anytime, it's a sheer numbers game. Anytime you have a lot of representatives at regions, you have a chance for all those kids to punch their tickets to AC. So I think that'll be really interesting to see kind of what happens there.
Joe, Regions 5 and 6, take us through it.
Well, for me, I will be at Region 6 at Jackson Liberty, and I think the major event there is Brook Memorial's Harvey Ludington will be going for his 4th region title, and believe it or not, he will be the first Brook Memorial wrestler in that program's storied history to win 4, and they've had some pretty damn good ones, over the last 40 years. Most recently, Vinny and Anthony Santinello and their father, Vinny, and many years ago, a tremendous wrestler named Billy Scott. But Harvey Ludington gets to go for number 4, and it will be his last appearance, within the boundaries of the Shore Conference in Monmouth and Ocean counties. And, if you want to see a state champion wrestle, don't blink, of course, because it probably won't be overly long, but it's a great chance to see him wrestle before he goes to Atlantic City. I fully expect him to be opposite Tanner Hodgins from Howell in the final. Tanner wrestled him in the Shore Conference, 7-3 score, but Tanner stood toe-to-toe with him and gave him everything he could want. Those two boys roll around a lot together at club. They know each other real well. Harvey's had a couple close ones in the last month, So I will be anxious to see if he puts the heel to the steel a little bit and goes out quick and strong. Region 5 is, to me, it's going to really be about 3 teams. St. Peter's Prep is in that region this year. They had 10 champions last week, including Caden Ricciardi, the reigning state champ at 138. He won his 4th district medal. Rumson Fairhaven entered only 10 kids in the district, had 7 champs, and won the district title. Rumson is, of course, led by its state champion, Sonny Amato, who has only 1 loss this season. Last week, Amato beat Mealy from Princeton 6-3. I would fully expect to see those two in the final again this week, and let's see if Mealy can draw a little closer. Another team to watch there, I think, is St. Joseph Metuchen. They're really the class of the GMC. They have some outstanding wrestlers, and I think they'll break through with 2 or 3 champions. But Region 5 should be a highly competitive and a lot of fun to watch.
That is incredible that Harvey, or that Brick Memorial, does not have a 4-time region champ. But it seems fitting that Harvey is going to be potentially the one to break that ice. Bill, Region 7 and 8.
Yeah, some interesting matches at 7. And I didn't. I guess as I recapped the districts. Well, actually, one thing I forgot to mention that there was a Seneca wrestler, Nicholas Schmid, who was down 14 points in his 190-pound final against Khalil Watts from Lenape and ended up getting a pin, which was another kind of interesting note from the weekend. But one of the bigger stories from there was Jordan Siegel, who was his 4th place finisher last year, 106 pounds, came back. He had an elbow injury at the Beast of the East and has not wrestled since. There was another state qualifier or state place winner from Shawnee, Luke Sherlock, who missed most of the season, came back about a week ago and only had a handful of matches coming in. And they were both wrestled. Sherlock ended up getting most outstanding wrestler. Siegel won his bracket at 113 pounds, probably more of a 106-pounder if he had been able to, wrestle all year and stay on weight. But, he's now part of an interesting 113-pound group with Anthony Mason from Southern, who he actually beat in the region semifinals a year ago. Mason went on to win or not win, but he made it to the state final. Some other really good groups. I talked about Michael DiBiase, the 4-timer from RBC, is in there. Ryan McConaughey from West Deptford, who only has 1 loss, and he had beaten in the district final Rocco Monteferrante from Audubon, who only has 2 losses. Very stacked weight class. You go to 120, Matthew Gould from Vianney, Richard DiLorenzo from Toms River East, who's very impressive, and Michael Lamb from Haddonfield. I think that's a very good weight class. And then I mentioned Weller from Delran at 150. He's in a group with Desmond Lenigan from St. John Vianney, Chris Aarons from Shawnee, and then DiPietro, who we just teched, but obviously, as I mentioned, was a region champ a year ago. And then you go to Region 8, and there's a lot of good matches from the quarterfinals on up, some real potential good semis, good finals. 106, we have Will Cruz, who I mentioned from Paulsboro, Tristan Rosemeyer, very impressive freshman from Williamstown, and Sudano from St. Augustine. 120, Christian Hoops from Washington Township, and Amari Van from Delsey would be a semifinal. Andre Hill from Paulsboro's on the other side. We talked about 26. 32 has a couple state place winners. Sammy Spalding from Camden Catholic, Williamstown's Jackson Slotnick, who's undefeated. 150 is a potential rematch of last year's final between Jamar Dixon from Delsey and Camden Catholic's Michael Kraft. Kraft won that 2-0 in sudden victory. 165, the quarterfinal, is Tommy Grimley from Ocean City and Ricky Watt from Shallock. Ricky Watt is undefeated. That, to me, would have been a final if Watt was on the other side. And then you look, again, 285, and I talked about Matthews upsetting Clifford Dirks. But you also have Mateo Vinciguerra from Woodstown, Mason Hay from Clearview in that group, a deep group of heavyweights. There's a lot of matchups in every round that I'm looking forward to, especially at Region 8.
So that'll do it for a somber episode number 8 of Weighing In, your go-to New Jersey high school wrestling podcast. We want to thank our producer, Brian Dekine, for putting this production together, as he always does. And we want to thank you, the listeners, for choosing us for your high school wrestling fix. When you hear from us next, we'll be breaking down the state tournament and the 3 days of fun that is always the end of the year action in Atlantic City. Take care, everyone.